starting something new. We have learned how to live stream to our YouTube channel. So we are meeting public meeting law requirements. So just wanted to elevate for you. So we're trying that for the first time in this meeting. Really excited to have you here. And it looks like that is working for us. So thank you so much, Barbara. Appreciate you. Welcome back. And welcome to some new faces. My name is Marnie Jewell, and we're going to have you do a little introduction of yourselves to get started. And we're going to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about our team and introduce yourselves here in a minute. Let's just go to the next slide and share our agenda today. First of all, we're just going to have you do some introductions. We're going to revisit our group purpose because we have some new people joining us, which is great. We're going to touch briefly on some norms, and we'll be looking to do more work with that at a future meeting. We're going to we're going to bring in some student voice and revisit our themes that we discussed previously. We're going to look at some ORS. Oregon statute. We're going to give you a few updates of what we're doing here at ODE, and then we're going to do a little recap and reflection. Next slide, please. So we're just so happy to come together as a team. And as you can see here, we've got our folks listed. We're so thankful Barbara gives us such good support on the back end, making all the magic happen. Thank you, thank you. And then our team members are shown here. Andrea is our director, and we appreciate her direction in this work. And you'll hear from her in just a moment. So in the next slide, what we want you to do is, if you have not had a chance to update your name, go ahead and update your name on your little square, your Zoom square. Looks like most people have their first and last names. That's helpful. What we'd like you to do is drop in the chat your pronouns, the organization you work with, and as we get started, what's one thing you're hoping to gain clarity on today? So we'll just take about 60 seconds to give you time to respond to that. What is one thing you're hoping to get clarity on today? Welcome, Annabelle. Wonderful, Whitney, understanding the bill language. Thank you for being here from Northwest Regional. Jen, information about perspectives on this from different agencies. Adrian, better clarity on the goals of the group. And we all look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you for sharing our perspective, Eulalia. Clarity on long-term goals. Thank you, Amy. Parasa, looking forward to reviewing the current rules and laws and how we can work together. Robin, a better sense of the work plan for this committee. Molly, OHA, hoping to gain clarity on the recommendations of this group. and the goals and outcomes desired from Catherine. Thank you. As other things come to mind, please feel free to share those. What I want to do next is turn this over to Andrea to really revisit the purpose of this committee. We know that we're bringing people along and just learning together. So we're almost at the spot of feeling like we've gotten some good clarity. So Andrea, next slide, please. Go ahead and take it from here.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks for being with us here again today as members of this Attendance Advisory Committee as mandated by House Bill 3199. If you could go to the next slide, please. So House Bill 3199 passed in the 2025 session. It was a reminder from our meeting last month. There's two key components of that bill. Number one, the Legislative Policy Research Office is conducting a study of attendance initiatives that is due to the legislature this fall of 2026. Our goal is actually to have them come and meet with you in the next couple of months to kind of update you on where they are in the process of that study. We've been in communication with them on the data they're collecting and what they're looking at, because a study of attendance initiatives since 2017 is a fairly large undertaking, as you can imagine. The second half of the bill directs ODE to convene an attendance advisory committee, which is all you, to make recommendations for policies to help improve attendance across the state. There was a companion bill that passed out of the Senate, Senate Bill 315, that directs the department versus the committee to do two specific things, which is to recommend a common coding system for student absences and recommend school district responses to student absences that exceed 10 days. That is an internal work group that will also be bringing information here to help inform your role to ultimately recommend policies to the legislature and the State Board of Education to, again, improve attendance, specifically for students that have experienced historic discrepancies in attendance and regular attendance. So it's a pretty big ask and a pretty tall order, and can go a lot of different ways. Our goal in the first meeting we had in December was to ground you into the legislation and the work that we're doing. And our goal in this meeting is to start to orient you to the many statutes that exist related to attendance and send you off with some homework to begin to work on developing those recommendations. And that is the role of this advisory committee. It includes specific participants from different education partners, and then some other folks who we believe are really critical to the work to make good recommendations. If you can go to the next slide, Barbara. This is a timeline for legislative deliverables that helps, I think, answer some of the questions, like where the clarity of what we're doing in the timeline in which we are doing those things. This is a timeline for both of the bills. We have that internal ODE cross-departmental work group that is working on Senate Bill 315 on the common coding and the 10-day response. You, as the Attendance Advisory Committee, is mandated by House Bill 3199, started meeting in December, and starting this month, we have a regular meeting cadence as we go forward through the year and work towards those proposals. This month too, we will start assigning you some work to do in between the meetings, because we know that the time will go fast. And getting a recommendation together to send to both the State Board of Education and the legislature takes a lot of work, right? And to come together on something as big as attendance. As you can imagine, there's probably not just one silver bullet policy out there to improve attendance, but quite a number of things that come together to help support the various components of attendance. Some really key deadlines. May of 2026 is when the Senate Bill 315 report is due to the legislature and the State Board of Education. You'll be seeing that as well. In September of 2026 is when the Legislative Policy Research Office study on attendance initiatives is due to the legislature. In November of 2026, which I know is 10 months away, but sometimes feels like tomorrow, the preliminary report from this group will be due to the legislature, And the final report from this group will be due at the beginning of February 2027, which is right about the time that our long session in 2027 begins. So that's a look at our timeline. There were a few questions that came out of our discussion last month. One of those questions that came was, what happens or what do we do if the recommendations from this group, if ODE doesn't agree with those recommendations, or if there's not alignment from this committee's recommendations with, for example, existing statute or maybe a governor's mandate? And the answer is that this group is an advisory group in nature. You will be making recommendations to ODE, and ODE will be crafting the final report. But we're doing that in collaboration, and we're going to do that as transparently as possible. And our goal in talking to you today, specifically in grounding you in some of the current laws, is so that you can start thinking about what recommendations you're interested in making, what improvements you've been thinking about in your roles around attendance, and how that either aligns with or doesn't align with current laws and rules. Because one of the things you can also do as a committee is recommend changes to those rules. So it's a big question to say, well, what happens if this committee recommends something that is sort of out of alignment with where the department is going or where the governor's priorities are? And we don't know yet, because we don't know yet what you're going to recommend. But I also don't think that this committee is going to necessarily recommend something that is really way out there. Like, let's stop taking attendance, for example, right? That would be an example of something that probably would not be a recommendation that the department would forward to the legislature, or that would, pass through the legislature as a policy. But as we get closer to making final recommendations, we will be transparent. We will bring in other voices. We will talk about where we know state priorities are going, and also be as transparent as possible about where a recommendation might run into some conflict with existing statute or rule, and then what does the committee want to propose to either change statute and rule, or to move or to recommend different priorities, so that can all be a part of what this committee does. So it was a really good question that was asked last month. And I think what we want to really encourage is we want this attendance advisory committee to feel empowered to make recommendations that are ultimately going to support student success and student outcomes. That's the goal. And if we hold that as our North Star, I don't believe that the committee will be recommending anything that we can't work to find a path to make a recommendation for. So that answers that question. Another question that was asked, and I'm going to turn it over to Marty, was how will this committee make decisions together? And so Marty's going to share how we're going to do that together as a committee.
Thank you, Andrea. So next slide, please. So we have leaned into the idea of the Fist to 5 protocol, which basically says anywhere between when we're wanting to make a decision about something, we use the Fist to 5, and we can do that visually. We can do it by number. I'm going to have Danny drop the actual written protocol that we've borrowed from somebody else. We didn't recreate it. We just said, oh, that's a good write-up. So if you want more details, it's available to see here on how this protocol is run. But essentially, the very short Cliff Notes version is that when we're ready to make a decision, we will use that Fist to 5 voting, and that everywhere from no way, I strongly object, not happening, to it's a great idea, I fully support it, and I will champion it, all the way behind it. So as you can see here on this slide, we've got anywhere from no way, I see major concerns, I still have reservations, I'd like to talk about it more. We call those 0, 1, and 2, like we don't have consensus yet. If we've got all 3s, 4s, and 5s, then we're more in the consensus phase, and we're all pretty much agreeing. Even if I'm not completely comfortable, I'm comfortable moving, still not sure how it's going to work out, clear up to championing it. So we're going to pretend we're going to practice one right now. You'll need your cameras on. You can click on at the top. If you want to move between slideshow and meeting and just seeing faces, you can click on the meeting tab at the very top tab of this meeting so you can see people's faces. I just did that, so I don't see the slideshow right now. So I'm going to ask you, we are going to do a fist to five consensus for our group meeting in February to snowboard at the top of Mount Hood. So now I'm going to ask you your consensus on whether or not we should do this for our February meeting. 0, absolutely not. 5, I'm going to champion it and bring extra snow gear and hot cocoa. What is your, and you'll need your camera on to vote with us. And we're going to ask you to share on your screen on a fist to 5 whether or not we should, as an attendance advisory committee, meet at the top of Mount Hood in February for our meeting. So we're going to all vote at the same time. 1, 2, 3, vote. Okay. So I see some yes, absolutely, and I see some absolutely not. Esther, would you share with us what your strong objection is to this proposal?
I love attendance work. I do not love being cold.
Okay. Andrea, I saw a strong champion. Tell me more about that.
Well, as a snowboarder for the last 30 years, I don't get enough chances. And so if I can work it into my workday, that's one more chance I have to be on the mountain.
Very good. Well, it sounds like we have some very serious concerns. I see insurance not good enough for those shenanigans in the chat. So a 1 for snowboarding from Jen, a 0 from Nike. It doesn't sound like we have consensus. So we'll have to go away, bring back some work, and bring this back another time. Thank you for participating in our short example of how we're going to use the fist to 5 to make decisions for this group. And you can go ahead and switch back to the tab showing the slideshow now, and we'll move forward. So we want to spend just a little bit of time to talk about how we are going to work together. Some of your feedback and questions about how we'll work together reminded us that we might find it useful to develop some group norms. And so rather than asking you to start from scratch, we've drafted some sample group norms, and they are grouped by 4 concepts. They're how we show up, how we work together, how we use our time and voice, and how we move forward. We're not going to dig into them today. We're going to revisit them in February. February is the next one. We're going to revisit them. But what I wanted to do is let you know that you will see them in an email. We're going to ask you to review them, and then we're going to revisit them. So we just want your input at that time to make sure to recommend and advise on what aspects are helpful, and make sure that there's nothing missing so that we create the right conditions for working together. But we just wanted to name that you will see those, and we're going to try to establish those at our next meeting. Next slide, please. What we want to do today is center before we dig into any statute in student voice. So our team has had the opportunity to connect with students over time, and there are some themes that students have shared with us. We're going to center one of those themes today, and we'll continue bringing that information back to this group, as well as a variety of other ways to bring student input. So pre-pandemic, we were in the process of doing listening sessions all around the state. And some of those listening sessions were with students specifically. Now, one of the topics we were focusing in on was the addition. Students advocated in the 2019 long session for mental and behavioral health to be included as reasons for an excused absence. And so one of those things we were doing was talking to students about what they needed regarding attendance support and what their feedback was. So during our listening sessions, here are some of the themes that were shared when we were talking about mental health. Students described that they experienced anxiety, depression, panic, stress, and these things directly interfered with their ability to come to school. They didn't feel like their school systems were very clear. They felt that they were inconsistently applied um, by teachers, by different schools, and they felt that their systems they were experiencing were invalidating. So, what they said they were experiencing was anxiety, panic attacks, crying at school, depression, emotional overwhelm, fear of large groups, or unsafe environments in some cases. They felt a lot of stress from being asked to perform with their grades or their workload or do all the stuff and things that they were trying to be involved in, and they worried that missing school would make things even harder, that the cycle then adds more pressure. They weren't asking to avoid school, but they were asking for time and space and understanding when mental health makes attendance temporarily difficult or impossible. They consistently describe mental health as one of those significant barriers to attendance, particularly when mental health issues make it difficult to engage in school. And a lot of students expressed a fear that current attendance practices penalize them for prioritizing their mental health. Next slide, please. So then what we did was said, like, what should we do? What do you hope will be done regarding attendance? And overwhelmingly, they said they just wanted clear, compassionate mental health supports. They wanted clear definitions. What does mental and behavioral health mean? How to take mental health days without stigma. And make sure that students have counseling available that they can get to, that everybody knows about, that it's accessible to students. They wanted to be able to go to safe places to decompress and, regroup, but not necessarily have to explain why they were needing that time. And then they also wanted support to return back to class. They just really indicated that they didn't want prioritizing their mental health to jeopardize their education. So what we want to spend just a few minutes with today, or just give you some time to think about, is how this feedback can really help us to think about how it guides our work. So we want to ask a couple questions, and this is just kind of for a broad group discussion. Sorry, I'm checking my minutes to see how much time we have. What stands out to you from what we've shared regarding student voice? And then what questions should it raise for our policy and practice conversations together as a group? I'll put those questions in the chat so that it's a little easier to consider those. Yes, Robin.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here. I think for me, from a parent perspective, we're hearing something just for general health from parents as well, right? If my kid is sick, then they're sick and I can't send them to school. So it kind of raises the question of whether there are excused absences that we want to not count toward the issue of absenteeism, be it mental health, be it physical health, or do we come to the conclusion of like there is no good day to miss school, and that overrides mental health, physical health as much as possible, and how do we balance those two kind of competing interests a little bit?
Priorities, yeah.
I agree with those statements. Well stated.
Jen.
Hey, thank you. I am wondering, like, first with the student voice, I guess I would like to know what demographics these students were. Like, I think what I'm particularly drawn to is I have experience teaching in rural Oregon, and we were trying to make sure that school was seen as a partner in mental health because of just the insane amount of like lack of resources in rural communities in Oregon. So this raises the question of like, how can schools be partners within the community to provide those resources for students where they can get that mental health support through school or at school, especially for our rural communities that don't have community resources or outside resources.
I appreciate the question. It also ties to a comment in the chat by Amy. The cost of staffing and counseling support to meet student needs isn't something currently available to districts. I will say, given a little bit of context, these listening sessions were specifically in Central Oregon, along the Oregon coast. We were I literally was in a listening session when I got called out, and was called back to Salem because it was March of 2020. So that was what was happening during that time. We actually didn't finish our tour of the state, but we had been in deeply involved in conversations with specific student groups, including we were intentionally trying to include the voices of rural students, and we actually asked for a mix of students, those who were good attenders and those who were chronically absent. We wanted to ensure that the students we were talking to were the most impacted by attendance practices. So thank you for asking that so that I could clarify that. Yeah, we can add some additional information about those listening sessions in our folder. Molly.
Yeah, thanks. I think, well, it raises a lot of thoughts for me, since I live at the intersection of mental health and education on a pretty daily basis, as so many of you do. But from a perspective of being within the Oregon Health Authority, I think we are thinking a lot about our role in supporting student mental health, specifically in schools. And one of the things that always comes up for me is how do we think about mental health supports, right, from the perspective of foundational mental health supports, sort of the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, right, where tier 3 is really the one-on-one counseling, which I would agree we're stretched very thin in terms of the capacity for students to get all their needs met in a school system. So how do we then partner with other community providers to make sure students are getting their needs met? So I think, again, thinking about it in terms of, right, the full spectrum of supports, not just going straight to, this person needs one-on-one counseling or mental health therapy, but thinking about how you create the environment in the school setting so that students are feeling supported. And, I think it's right a tricky balance to have those support systems in place and the funding and resources for those support systems, and still maintain right the academic rigor and the expectation that students be in school and are there to learn, and so that messaging that we care about students and want them to be learning, I think is paramount, and also having the flexibility to meet them where they're at and provide whatever flexibility they need to be successful. And that's asking a lot of our system and of our educators.
Yeah. Jan asked if there have been any listening sessions post-pandemic, and Catherine noted that pre-pandemic feels forever ago and the world has changed a lot. There might be different or additional things now. I'm appreciating that you brought that up because literally yesterday I met with our team who holds the SEED survey data, and we were actually having this very discussion around comparing the themes that we saw pre-pandemic with what they're seeing now. And so this is definitely a theme that's in conversation, and we'll continue having this conversation with our team and with the points of data to see what we have available. Nike, I'm going to call on you, and then I'm going to read the comments as we wrap up student voice. Go ahead, Nike.
What resonated with me was, I'm actually going to say pre and post pandemic, is this is what we have been hearing from our students for a very, very long time. And one of the things that I've seen, that budget is always the issue at the end of the day. And you cannot address this without addressing the finances. Because whether it's a partner, they need a grant. They got to find the budget, right? To be able to supply the needs. I've seen schools partner with the different colleges and get in interns in the mental health field and provide additional layer. And still, that's still a budget. You still got to pay a supervisor. One of the things that within addressing school climate and addressing services and resources, and that one of the things that stood out to me most is the inconsistency of the system. Regardless of how many supports that you have, if a student can go into one classroom and have one type of experience and go to another classroom and they have another type of experience, and we hear that throughout, the inconsistency of, unfortunately, our teachers and staff, meaning non-teaching staff. It impacts the climate and whether a student feels like they have a sense of belonging, whether they get information, right? Assumptions about who has mental health or the layer of it, what's serious mental health versus you're just trying to get out of class because of their own biases. So I think the inconsistency throughout their systems that they're experiencing live time in those local schools, to me, is huge. And I've unfortunately seen the impact of that.
Thank you. Andrea, thank you for elevating. Yeah, we haven't done any specific student engagement since that time. And those surveys, SEED survey or health survey, those are things that we definitely can loop around with, partner back with, and bring some of that information back again. So thank you so much for engaging in that conversation. We just really want to lean into your feedback that said centering in the student experience and student voice is really important. We hope to have students with us to actually share their experience in the future. And in the meantime, we'll bring student voice in the ways that work out for us each time that we can navigate. Next slide, please. We want to give you a little historical context, leaning into the idea that this group asked, like, what's been done previously? How are we aligning? How do we know that we're not duplicating? We can assure you that we aren't doing anything duplicative through this work because everything builds upon everything that's happened in the past. So we wanted to give you a little historical context. In 2015, we started collecting chronic absenteeism data here at the Department of Education. In 2016, the Tribal Attendance Pilot Program began and continues today under the title of Tribal Attendance Practices, Promising Practices. And then also House Bill 4002 was passed, which required that ODE and the Chief Ed Office do some investigating about chronic absenteeism across the board. In 2017, the chronic absenteeism statewide plan was adopted and the Everyday Matters team was formed. 2018 was the design phase where what's it going to look like? So there was a regional consortium model. There were tier 3 districts identified with the highest levels of chronic absenteeism, and there was a slice created, so lots of formulas with how we worked directly with districts to support attendance. And then Oregon Education Association of ESDs and ODE partnered together to support tier districts that were more at a tier 2 level, higher levels, but not getting attendance support directly in the financial grants from ODE. And then the rules for Everyday Matters were adopted. 2019 is where I entered the scene. So all of this happened before I was part of the team. In 2019, we were doing an attendance awareness campaign. We were providing tier 2 support through the regional model. We were working directly with districts on those higher level, higher needs, most chronically absent districts. And students advocated to the legislature to have mental and behavioral health added to the statute, Oregon statute, for reasons for excused absence. And then 2020, and and the funding was paused for the chronic absenteeism work during 2020, and we did not collect attendance data for 1 year. So that created a break. So then we're going to move to the next slide where.
Marnie, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
Can you go back, Barbara? So one of the questions that came up last time out of the group was, how is this attendance advisory committee different from past work that's been done? And so we really wanted to go a little bit backwards when an increase and an increased attention in chronic absenteeism happened both in Oregon, but also nationwide. Because this particular attendance advisory committee is building upon work that was done in the past. So what this timeline, both this slide and the next slide, are really intended to help show and ground you all in is where the state has been over the last 11 years related to attendance. So the work that's happening right now is not, we're not starting over. We're building off of work and effort that was done in the past. And later, when we start looking at the Oregon revised statutes, we're going to look at one of those statutes today and then send you home with homework because reading statute is boring and complicated. And we're not going to do that by committee. You do it on your own. But we're hoping that by giving you this historical context, as you look at those rules, you'll have this picture in mind to help you think about where those rules came from and the various ways that those rules kind of built upon each other. Because ultimately, right, one of the big questions in the chat earlier about what you're hoping to gain out of the time today is that clarity of purpose. The clarity of purpose is we're at a place right now where after this many years of this focus on attendance, we have some work that's needed to bring coherence and cohesion to where we go next. So 2015, the other thing that was happening in 2015 was that No Child Left Behind was reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act at that federal level. And at that time, pretty much every state in the nation added a measure of chronic absenteeism to its overall accountability and school improvement framework. Oregon was one of those states as well. If you have never gone back and read the Chief Education Office Chronic Absenteeism Report from 2017, even though we did have a global pandemic in the middle, you're going to see similar themes, just like when the themes from the student voice work that Marnie shared, many of those themes persist today. So those are all of this is building, right? And this is that information that says, okay, here's what past work groups have done. Here's the work that came from those past groups. So when you combine both the legislation, you take House Bill 4002, that led to the report from the Chief Education Office, which led to the regional consortium model, which led to having regional capacity builders, which led to this great student voice push to have mental health as an excused absence, interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And then on the next slide, you're going to see the shifts that were made after the COVID-19 pandemic, but really hoping this timeline kind of helps answer that question from last month. What has been done in the past by other work groups? And this is what's really answering that question. Thanks, Marnie.
Yeah, next slide, please. in 2021, the legislature removed the Class C violation penalty for unexcused absences or truancy. We also updated the OAR, the rule on how schools should support students when they're absent. And then ESDs then began just getting a flat amount of technical assistance funds when that funding was reinstated to help support that. And basically, we learned that there are some of those root causes are because of the work previously, as Andrea has been describing. Sometimes it takes the partnership concept. So the idea of the community partnership grants became part of our rule as a result of the lessons learned previously. And we continued to work with our ESDs while working with our grantees in 23 and 24, developing that. Meanwhile, there was a work group happening with a group of superintendents who were looking at attendance practices and how they could move the dial, while there was also a legislative work group that was led by Rep. Wynn and Senator Weber. And Andrea, I see you have something you want to add. Oh, okay, I misunderstood. And so what has happened as a result of all those lessons learned and shifting bit by bit, as Andrea so eloquently already let you know, that this led to Senate Bill 315 and House Bill 3199. And 3199 is the reason we are together today. 3199 says, hey, let's get a group of really smart people from across a variety of agencies and different perspectives and really look at what's the thing going on with attendance in statute and in practice, and what would be our recommendations to elevate that consistency and coherency, because we've learned along the way that there's a lot of updates needed. I'm going to name for you some of these ORS statutes date back into the 50s. And then little changes have been made along the way, but never the whole section. And we'll talk a little bit about how some of those are actually just dumped in, but then there's a note that says they're really not part of the chapter. And so it's confusing to people. And so that's why this work is so important as we look at what's in existence. What do we want to recommend based on what we've learned over the past decade? And those reports are due in this year. So that's kind of what brings us up to speed with, we're not duplicating, we're building, we're aligning, we're refining what needs to happen in order to have a more coherent, consistent way of approaching improving attendance in Oregon. All right, so what does that look like? Let's on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what that means. As we dig into this, we've got we're gonna look at the 4 buckets that we are focusing on within our work. We're looking at statute or laws passed by the legislature. And changes to statute usually take longer because they involve that legislative action. We won't be drafting legislation, but your input can help to inform our recommendations about unintended consequences that are happening as a result of what's currently in statute. So we would capture that as part of our recommendations moving forward to the legislature. Oregon Administrative Rule is all the rules that are passed to support the law. So those are a little bit more responsive. Thank you, Parasa. Yes, that SB 141 is an important piece of what happened in 25. That rule then is adopted by agencies or boards, such as the State Board of Education. And they can be updated through an administrative process. It doesn't have to go clear back to the legislature. And so sometimes the legislature will put in statute that something has to be defined or revised through rule, through a specific body like the State Board of Education. And then we have right now, so for an example, in statute, you know what, no, I'm not going to go into that. In rule, one of the things we can use as an example is right now, our rule says that there's a 10-day unenroll process related to absence. That's a rule. It's not in statute. So that's something that's connected to other bodies of work and connected to rules that have been passed by the State Board of Education. Technical assistance includes any guidance or tools that we will give and shared learning opportunities that we provide. So this is oftentimes the fastest way to support those systems when longer term changes are underway. So for example, we are in the process of creating we created a when to come to school in collaboration with OHA around attendance. These are when illness should impact you staying home, and these are reasons why we would want you to come to school. That would be technical assistance, and it can move much more quickly than OAR or OAS. And then there might be resources that a group identifies where that we as a group may identify that funding might be critical. You've raised some really important points today around access and resources. And this is where these recommendations for funding and resources may come into play for us as a group. We may identify areas where funding is critical to the successful implementation of what is recommended. And those recommendations for those resources might inform future legislative grant design or allocation or funding allocation. And any funding discussions that we would have, we would want to tie those discussions to capacity, sustainability, equity, to ensure that our recommendations are really leaning into that. However, one of the things that I do want to add in terms of the statute is that statute is law is enacted, and then it's the legislative council puts those numbers in, and they put them where they think they should go into a chapter. And so this group can name suggestions for those chapters or improvements or numbering, because that's done by the legislative council. We also have the option to, in statute, potentially repeal a section and then ask that it be rewritten for consistency or coherence. So those are options that would potentially be available to us in recommendations. Next slide, please. All right, so all that being said, we want to jump into some conversation about statute. We're going to start with one, the very first one for attendance. And we're going to put the wording into the chat for you because we're going to go into breakout rooms in just a few minutes. But basically, this chapter is 339. This is where compulsory attendance lies. And this statute is numbered 010, and it is titled School Attendance Required. And so there are 4 points under this. And as you can see, I'm just going to highlight a few of these words. Except as provided in a subsequent number, all children between the ages of 6 and 18 years who have not completed the 12th grade are required to regularly attend a public full-time school. Number 2 says, if a child's been enrolled in a public school at the age of 5, they're still required to attend regularly. So if they're a kindergartner enrolled in a public school, that's what number 2 fits in. I'm just going to not read that to you, but explain it. And then it describes in section 3, when is that child considered to be 6 years of age? It's if that child's birthday occurred on or before September 1, right before the school year starts. And then for a child who's 6 years of age, the requirement of number 1 is met if the child regularly attends any grade. So they're not required to go to kindergarten or first grade. They could be enrolled in kindergarten in at grade age 6. So I just want to give that practical example. That's not in statute, but that's kind of what that means. There's not a requirement in which grade they have to be enrolled in when they reach the age of 6. Okay. So that's the overview of that statute. And what we're going to do now is hop into breakout rooms where you get the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about where this law supports attendance, belonging, and engagement, and where it might unintentionally limit responsive or relational approaches. And Barbara is going to put us into breakout rooms, and we will return at 12:08. So just want to put that out there now. We will be returning at 12:08. So join a breakout room. Welcome back. I was fortunate to actually be zoomed away at the end of a sentence. I'm not sure if that was true for all the rest of you, but Amy got to finish the sentence, so I was appreciating that. Um, we want to spend just a few minutes of time really talking a little bit about what you discussed. How does this law support attendance, belonging, engagement, and also what does it intentionally limit in terms of responsiveness? So maybe we can have a share out from some Saskia. What about your room?
Thanks, Marnie. In our room, we had some really great reflections on how this section of the statute affects sort of the student experience and the family experience, and some noticings were thoughts that the law really it supports attendance but puts responsibility on the parents or the family. It doesn't mention anything about belonging or welcoming, like that language is not included. And that it is really not naming the school's role in sort of creating an environment for students to participate in, to belong in. We had some sort of not tangents, but related noticings about how the impact on students who are perhaps within the foster care system, or students with disabilities, or students who have reasons they may not be in school, are really there's an emphasis on attending school, but that might come at harm to some students in some cases, because the law is directing students to be at school and families to make sure students are at school. Yeah, that's a sort of short summary of things that were brought up in our group.
Thank you. Andrea.
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation about the ways, given both the rise of virtual charter schools in Oregon and then post-pandemic or during pandemic, sort of the nuance of being able to engage in school in more of a virtual or a hybrid environment, that our laws don't really reflect that reality for families, and how might having that lens of how we look at virtual school, hybrid school, impact how we look at the statutes, and how also do we make sure that the experiences in brick and mortar schools, in virtual schools or hybrid environments are also equitable for students. And then something that Parasa said that just always sticks with me is, how do we always ensure quality of time and not only quantity of time?
Thank you. Danny.
Yeah, we talked about how this statute is the responsibility isn't across systems as well. And it's not saying anything about like what school should be looking like, or how students should be engaged, or what belonging looks like, or anything about the school environment as a whole. There's also some questions around how homeschool or online schooling applies to this one. Our group also talked about wanting to see all of the statutes and see how they all kind of play with each other, or is this statute defined somewhere else or not? There's also curiosity around seeing where else in the statutes, like homeschool or not homeschooled, unhoused students are talked about, how their schooling is impacted, rural students, how this all looks different. And then, yeah, lots of questions about like how do we define school? How do we define presence, absence, regular attendance in this way? Yeah, and team, if I left anything out, please add it too.
Appreciate
I think
that.
the only, I'm sorry, I think
ahead,
the only
Jen.
other thing that we mentioned was like the concept of universal preschool. Like, why are we sticking with age 6 for compulsory attendance?
Thank you. Eulalia.
Yes, so our group had similar discussions. We talked about how this specific part of the chapter is focused on compulsory attendance, but belonging and engagement is a component outside of it, especially in how different schools and districts create belonging and engagement through their school culture and climate. And we also talked about the flexibility that is needed for small districts, especially in rural areas with a small number of students and staff. And Esther and Whitney, feel free to add anything that I missed.
Okay. And my group talked briefly about, well, we were in a few, first of all, it doesn't feel like this is supporting attendance. It feels like it's directing, was something that was named, and it is under compulsory attendance. So that's noted. There's nothing about how to support families or supporting schools in implementing in this particular one that we looked at. There was some conversation about guidance for families on how do we onboard at an early age and provide the support for them to understand the importance of attendance. How are we partnering with other community partners? How do we like help the whole community understand how they can support, whether it's medical providers, civic leaders, faith-based leaders, and that attendance should be kind of a community-driven partnership. So that was some of the conversations we had. So hopefully, by having the opportunity to look at this one line, and gives you an idea of what we'll be doing and what we're asking you to do, as Danny highlighted, this is one, but it's not in context with all the other statutes that are related to attendance. And so we will be providing for you a link for the statutes and the ability to comment on those as you do some review. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that will be our next steps, is really looking in total at those statutes and then revisiting your feedback in our next steps. So we're going to skip the next slide. And we're going to give you just a little overview of what we're doing here at ODE. So we have an eye to that report that's due in May, and we'll be looking at making sure that we provide that by May 31st to the State Board of Education, as well as the interim committees in the legislative committees. We're currently working with a 10-day work group that's focusing on the 10-day unenroll process and what our recommendations would be related to that. And then common coding. Both of these are named in Senate Bill 315, which is the other bill that was enacted that we have connected to this body of work, but wasn't connected in the two different bills that were passed. So that's why we're wanting to keep you apprised of the work we're doing. We've also drafted some guidance around what counts as present to help school districts be a little more clear. That's in process, and we hope to release that soon. What we want to talk a little bit more about on our next slide is our cadence. So for the most part, based on your responses, we have landed, next slide, please. We have landed on that last Wednesday of the month, except for April, because the last Wednesday in March is spring break. So because there are 5 Wednesdays in April, you should see those updated. I got a note that for some reason, Zoom is only holding 60 minutes instead of 90 for those. So we're going to resolve that issue for those of you who are having that problem. And then So we will have the 2 meetings in April, one on April 1st and one on April 29th. We'll still have the same number of meetings. We're just moving that back a week. And then we're going to request some homework, 2 pieces. As we already discussed, we want you to look at our draft of those group norms. And we want you to look at the attendance statute. We will be sending you after this meeting an email that will have the links to those. Both of those documents are in the resource folder we've already provided for you. And we will also provide that to you as well. We are hoping that you can review these documents by the 11th of February so that our team has time to pull it back together and look for the themes and create that feedback for us moving forward in our next meeting. And we will also note that in your email as well. I want to make sure that I have covered anything. Andrea, have I missed anything that you were hoping we would touch base on in this section?
I don't think so. Just kind of, continue to keep you abreast of what the deadlines are. Parasa, to your point in the chat, yes, we do foresee bringing the 315 group to talk about the common coding and the 10-day advisory. There's just a mismatch, legislation is messy. There's a mismatch of timelines. Similarly, we'd like LPRO to come and talk with you as well. So those will be topics for upcoming meetings. Always invite what you would like us to continue to bring to you to work us towards those final set of recommendations for this work group. I think that's all I can think of right now.
I see Parasa's question about, can members of this committee listen into the meetings on the 10-day and common coding? The idea was that what we're trying to do is align internally. Like if we're recommending something, is there something we don't know about? Let's definitely, Andrea, loop back on that question and maybe get a response to folks.
Yeah, I think the answer is going to be, we'll be bringing the 315 group to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great as long as there's ways to kind of cross-share the information. Because they're just more technical pieces that I'm really green on.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure I had a deep understanding of it so that I can give the best feedback. And of course, when the time is right, I can always channel out to our membership too, for feedback as needed.
Yeah, and big picture thinking too, the goal is really to bring all of this together, to that coherence and cohesion point that I talked about earlier. The goal overall from the department and with our partners is not to have 25 different competing pieces of attendance work. This is a system that works together to help support students to have meaningful instructional experiences that lead to student outcomes, right? That's the point of attendance. That's what we're trying to work towards. And so as we kind of work within these overlapping timelines, trying to get to a place of like kind of a neat package with a bow, it's going to be messy because that's kind of the nature of this kind of work. But we hope to have all the puzzle pieces kind of working together as opposed to the puzzle pieces being out there on their own.
Thank you. With that, we want to recap and give you an opportunity to kind of give us some feedback. So I'm going to, thank you, Danny, ask you to hop into the link that Danny has dropped and just share with us today just a couple of thoughts. What felt most meaningful and what should we prioritize next? We will be looking at all of your input and all the things. So it really, really matters to us what's working well for you, what you're carrying away, things that we want to make sure, if you have thoughts on things that we need to make sure that we are prioritizing for our work together. So thank you so much for your time today. We will fix the Zoom invite situation for those who had only 1 hour hold. We will look forward to seeing you in February. And we really, really appreciate your time. What you do matters. we're going to hang on here in case anybody has some extra questions. We're going to stop the